Steam curled off the container in my hands like something alive, like it had its own heartbeat, and maybe it did, because mine was pounding hard enough for two. I stood at the edge of the construction site with a paper bag pressed against my chest, the smell of grilled peppers and warm rice rising up to meet the cold morning air. And I told myself the same lie I told myself every single day: this is just a job, this is just lunch, this means nothing. The lie got harder to believe every time I saw him. Nick Trevino stood 40 feet away in a hard hat and a jacket that had seen better winters, shouting something up at a man on scaffolding, one hand braced on his hip, the other pointing at a beam like it had personally offended him. Even from here I could see the tension in his shoulders, the exhaustion carved into the line of his jaw. He hadn't been sleeping. I knew that the way I knew the sound of his laugh, the way I knew exactly how he took his coffee, the way I knew the small secret thing growing beneath my ribs was his and only his, and he had no idea. I adjusted the strap of my bag over my shoulder and walked toward the site trailer past men in reflective vests who nodded at me now like I belonged there. Like I was just the kid from the corner diner who brought lunch every day at noon, rain or shine without fail. Nobody questioned it anymore. Nobody looked twice at the oversized jacket I wore, even when the sun was high enough to bake the pavement, or the way I always held my bags a little low, a little forward, like I was shielding something. Only one person had ever looked at me twice, and it wasn't for the reasons I feared. "You're early," Nick said, not turning around, like he'd felt me coming the way I always imagined alphas could, some old instinct buried under all that steel and concrete dust. 10 minutes, I said. Don't let it go to your head. That earned me a huff that wasn't quite a laugh, but was close enough that something in my chest loosened just slightly, the way it always did. He finally turned, and for one unguarded second before he caught himself, his eyes softened in a way that had nothing to do with lunch and everything to do with the 11 months since we'd last spoken as anything other than a customer and a delivery boy pretending not to remember each other's names. He remembered. I knew he remembered. He just didn't know why I was pretending he shouldn't. "What'd you bring me today?" he asked, reaching for the bag, and our fingers brushed for half a second, warm skin against warm skin, and I felt it everywhere, in my throat, in my knees. Low in my belly where something else lived now, something that fluttered every time his voice got low and rough like that. Grilled chicken, peppers, rice. I pulled my hand back first, always first, because if I let it linger even a second too long, I was afraid of what I might say. "Don't complain about the peppers again. I put extra just to spite you. You always put extra to spite me." He was already opening the container, already breathing in the steam, like it was the only good thing that had happened to him all week, and for a moment his face went soft and unguarded, tired in a way that made my heart ache with a tenderness I had no right to feel anymore. "You're the only person on this earth who feeds me like they're mad at me. If you only knew," I thought, and the thought came with a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with the baby and everything to do with guilt, thick and constant. A companion that never left my side, no matter how many months passed. I remembered the first time I'd ever seen him over a year ago, now standing in almost this exact spot with blueprints spread across a folding table, arguing with the city inspector about load-bearing walls with the patience that surprised me given the size of him, the sheer physical presence that filled a room before he'd said a single word. I'd been an intern then, fresh out of school, sent to observe site logistics for a design firm that no longer employed either of us in any capacity, and I remembered thinking, with the kind of foolish certainty only 25-year-olds possess, that I would never let myself fall for a man like that. Too intense, too much gravity. The kind of person who pulled everything toward him without even trying, and I had been so sure, so arrogant in my certainty that I could stand near that gravity and not eventually fall into it. I had been wrong within 3 weeks. It started with coffee, the kind of accidental thing that only felt inevitable, in hindsight, him showing up at the same corner cart every morning at the same time I did. Both of us too proud to admit we'd started timing our arrivals around each other. Then it was lunch breaks spent talking about nothing important. Then long nights after site closures when he'd walk me to the train and linger at the platform until my car pulled away. Then finally, one impossibly ordinary evening that became the most important night of my life. Everything neither of us had been saying finally said all at once, breathless and certain in his apartment with the city lights spilling gold across the floor. I hadn't known, that night, that I was already carrying the beginning of everything I would later run from. I hadn't known anything except how right it felt to finally stop pretending gravity wasn't gravity. "Eat," I said instead, softer than I meant to, pulling myself back into the present, back into the man in front of me who still had no idea how far back my memory had just traveled. "You look like you haven't in days." He looked up at me, then really looked the way he used to look at me before everything fell apart before I ran. Before I found out I was carrying something that would tie me to him forever, whether either of us wanted it or not. His eyes moved over my face like he was trying to read something written in a language he used to know fluently and had slowly, painfully, been forgetting. "You worry about me," he said. It wasn't a question. It was something closer to wonder. "I worry about everyone." I lied and turned to go before he could see the truth sitting right there on my face, plain as daylight. Plain as the small curve beneath my jacket that I pulled tighter with every step away from him. The diner where I worked, or claimed to work, sat 2 blocks from the site, wedged between a laundromat and a shuttered bookstore, its windows perpetually fogged from the kitchen heat. Mrs. Alvarez, who owned the place and had never once asked me a personal question in the 4 months I'd been there, looked up from the register when I walked in, her eyes doing the quick, practiced sweep she always gave me, checking for what I never knew. Maybe just checking that I was still standing. "He eat it all?" she asked. "Every bite." "Good." She went back to her register tape. "You look pale. Sit down before you drop." I didn't argue. I never had the energy to argue anymore, not since the second trimester had rolled in and brought with it a tiredness that lived in my bones. That made the walk from the site back to the diner feel longer every week. I sat at the counter and pressed a hand to my stomach just for a second, just long enough to feel the small, insistent flutter that had started 3 weeks ago and hadn't stopped since. This tiny, stubborn rhythm that belonged to no one but me, and biologically, unknowingly, a man 40 feet away who thought I only fed him out of some strange habit of pity. "You should tell him, Mrs. Harble," Alvarez said, not looking up. My head snapped toward her. "Tell him what?" "Whatever you're carrying around besides the lunch bags, Mijo." She finally met my eyes, and there was no judgment in them, only a weariness that came from watching me carefully for months and drawing her own conclusions. "I've run this counter for 22 years. I know an Omega hiding a pregnancy when I smell one walk through my door every morning, smelling more like him every week." The room tilted. My hand flew to my stomach on instinct, protective, useless, because there was nothing to protect it from except the truth, which had apparently never been as hidden as I'd convinced myself. "I'm not," I started, and the words died because there was no point lying to a woman who'd clearly already decided what she knew. "You don't have to tell me," she said gently, "but you should tell him. Before someone else does. Before that belly does the telling for you." She reached over and covered my hand with hers, weathered and warm. "Whatever happened between you two, a baby's not going to wait for you to be brave enough." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I sat there with my hand pressed to the small secret weight of everything I was too afraid to say, and I thought about the last night Nick Trevino had touched me like I was something precious. And the morning after, when I'd packed a bag and left before he woke up because I was young and terrified and certain, so certain that he didn't want the things I wanted, the permanence, the forever. The family neither of us had ever said out loud. There was a woman on the site now. Dana, one of the structural engineers brought in for the second phase of the project, sharp-eyed and confident, the kind of Omega who walked through a construction site like she owned every beam of it. And I hated, absolutely hated, the small twist of jealousy that had taken up residence in my chest since the day I first saw her lean over Nick's shoulder to point at a set of drawings, her hand resting far too casually on his forearm. I told myself it meant nothing. I told myself I had no right to feel anything at all, given that I was the one who'd left, the one who'd spent months lying to his face about a baby he didn't know existed. But jealousy, I was learning, cared very little for what a person deserved to feel. "She's sharp," Nick had said once, entirely too casually, when I asked about her in what I hoped was an offhand tone. "Good at her job, keeps the crew honest about the timeline." "That's nice," I'd said, and hated the tightness in my own voice, hated that he heard it too, his eyes flicking toward me with a question he didn't ask, not that day. It came to a head on a gray Thursday, when I arrived with lunch to find Dana laughing at something Nick had said, her hand on his arm again, her head tilted close. And something ugly and possessive rose up in me so fast, it frightened me, some ancient Omega instinct I hadn't known I possessed until that exact moment. The urge to plant myself between them and make some kind of claim I had absolutely no right to make. I didn't do it, of course. I stood at the edge of the site with the bag growing heavy and cold in my hands, and I watched them for a full minute before Nick noticed me at all, and when he finally did, his whole face changed, brightened the way it always did, and he stepped away from Dana without a second glance, crossing the distance between us, like she'd simply ceased to exist the moment I appeared. "Hey," he said, taking the bag from my hands, oblivious to the storm that had just passed through me. "You okay? You look tense." "Fine," I said, too quickly, "just tired." He studied me a beat longer than the answer warranted, but let it go, and I hated myself a little for the relief I felt, a little for the possessiveness I had no right to, a little for the fact that some small foolish part of me had wanted him to notice, wanted him to see the flicker of hurt I couldn't quite hide and ask about it directly, instead of accepting my easy dismissal. That night, lying awake with my hand on my belly, I understood something new about myself. I hadn't just been hiding a pregnancy from him. I'd been hiding an entire ocean of feeling jealousy and fear and love all tangled together, because admitting any single thread of it meant admitting all of it. And admitting all of it meant risking the one thing I couldn't survive losing twice. I didn't have a claim on Nick Trevino. Not really. Not as long as I kept the truth buried where he couldn't see it. And that, more than Dana's easy laughter or her hand on his arm, was the thing that finally cracked something open in me. Some quiet resolve settling into place beneath the fear. I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep standing at the edge of his life, feeding him lunch and swallowing jealousy and pretending I had no stake in his future, when the truth was, I had the biggest stake of anyone, growing a little larger every single week. I hadn't known then that I was already carrying the family I was running from. Quick pause here. If you want to watch our videos early with 0 ads or get access to exclusive videos, our Patreon has you covered, link in the description. Alright, back to where things get interesting. That night, I lay awake in my small apartment above the laundromat, the ceiling fan ticking overhead. My hand resting on the curve of my belly that grew a little more defined every week, no matter how I tried to hide it under layers and loose fabric. 14 weeks. Nick didn't know. Nick had never known, because the morning I found out, standing in a clinic with a stranger's kind eyes telling me congratulations like it was the easiest word in the world. The only thing I could think was that I had left him 3 weeks earlier for reasons that suddenly felt smaller than the thing now growing inside me. I could still remember the fight. Not even a fight, really. Just words spoken too fast, both of us raw and frightened by how much we'd let ourselves feel. He'd said something about not being the kind of alpha who settled down. Something bitter and defensive that I later understood had come from his own fear, not his own truth, but I hadn't stayed to learn the difference. I'd heard the words I was afraid of hearing, and I'd run before he could see how much they'd broken me. And now I brought him lunch every day like some kind of penance. Like proximity was the closest thing to honesty I could manage. I told myself it was because Mrs. Thackeray Alvarez needed the extra set of hands for deliveries, that the site was close enough to make sense, that it had nothing to do with the ache in my chest Every time I saw his face and thought about how it would look, staring down at a positive test, at a growing belly, at a truth I'd kept from him for 3.5 months. The flutter came again, low and soft, and I pressed both hands over the place where I felt it, tears rising before I could stop them. I know, I whispered into the dark, to no one, to everyone. I know I have to tell him. I'm just so scared he'll say the same thing he said before. The baby, of course, said nothing back. But the flutter came again, stronger this time, and I let myself believe, just for that one quiet moment, that it was some small kind of reassurance. The next morning, I almost didn't go. I stood in front of my closet for 10 minutes, staring at the row of oversized jackets I'd bought specifically for this, hating every single one of them. Hating the way I'd built an entire wardrobe around hiding a truth from the one person who deserved to know it most. My reflection in the mirror looked tired, older than 26 should feel, my face fuller now, a softness in my cheeks that Nick would have noticed immediately if he'd ever let himself really look, if I'd ever let him. I went anyway. I always went. Some things, apparently, were stronger than fear. The sight was loud that day, machinery grinding somewhere behind the fencing, dust hanging in the air like a held breath. I found Nick in the same spot as always, but this time he wasn't shouting at anyone, wasn't gesturing at beams or scaffolding. He was sitting on an overturned crate with his head in his hands, and something about the stillness of him, the defeat in his posture, made my feet move faster than they should have. "Hey," I said, crouching in front of him before I could think better of it. "What happened?" He looked up, and his eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted in a way that went deeper than missed sleep. Lost the Kessler contract. 2 years of work, gone in a phone call. He laughed, short and humorless. "Doesn't matter, not your problem." "It's a little bit my problem," I said softly. "I've been feeding you for 4 months. I've got equity in your well-being now." That earned a real laugh this time, small and surprised, like I'd pulled it out of him against his will. "Equity in my well-being," he repeated. "You always did have a way of saying things that made the bad stuff feel smaller." I remembered that about us suddenly and painfully, how we used to sit on his fire escape after long days, and I'd talk him down from whatever storm was raging in his head. How good I used to be at making him feel like the ground under his feet was solid again. I missed it. I missed him, this specific version of him, tired and honest and unguarded, more than I'd let myself admit in months. "Nick," I said, and something in my voice must have shifted, because his eyes came up sharper, more focused, like he'd heard something underneath the word. "Yeah?" The bag was heavy in my hands, and my heart was heavier still, and I opened my mouth to say the thing I'd rehearsed 100 times in the mirror. The thing about the flutter and the 14 weeks and the truth I owed him. "Trevino!" a voice bellowed from across the site, one of his foremen waving frantically. "We got a problem with the east wall. Need you, now." Nick's whole body tensed, the moment shattering like glass. He looked at me, apologetic, torn, already halfway to standing. "Hold that thought," he said, gripping my shoulder for just a second, warm and grounding. "Whatever it was, I want to hear it. Tonight, maybe, after the site closes. Just you and me, no lunch bag between us." I nodded, throat too tight for words, and watched him jog away toward the shouting toward the fire he was needed to put out, and I stood there holding the bag with his lunch still inside. My confession swallowed whole by bad timing. Tonight, I thought, pressing a hand to my belly. Tonight, I'll tell him everything. I didn't make it to tonight. The dizziness hit me on the walk back to the diner, sudden and violent, the world tilting sideways without warning. 1 second I was crossing the street, the bag from Nick's uneaten lunch still in my hand, and the next, my knees were buckling, my vision narrowing to a pinpoint of gray. A car horn blaring somewhere far away, like it belonged to another life. I don't remember falling. I remember hands, strong and frantic, catching me before I hit the pavement. A voice saying my name over and over like a prayer, like a plea. And even through the fog closing in around my mind, I knew that voice knew it, the way I knew my own heartbeat. "Joshua, Joshua, look at me, stay with me, come on." Nick's face swam into view above me. terror written across every feature, and I wanted to tell him I was fine. Wanted to tell him it was just low blood sugar, just exhaustion, just anything other than the truth. But my body had other plans, and the last thing I registered before the world went black entirely was his hand pressed flat against my stomach as he checked for injuries. His palm resting right over the place where our secret lived, and even unconscious, some part of me understood that everything was about to change. I woke up in a hospital bed with fluorescent light pressing against my closed eyelids and the steady beep of a monitor keeping time with my heart. For a moment, I floated in that soft, disoriented space between sleep and waking, comfortable, unaware, and then memory came crashing back all at once and my eyes flew open. Nick sat in the chair beside my bed. He hadn't left. I could tell by the state of him, hard hat gone, jacket wrinkled, dark circles carved deep beneath his eyes, a paper cup of vending machine coffee gone cold in his hands. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at the small monitor beside my bed, the one displaying a rhythm that had nothing to do with my own pulse, a rhythm too fast, too small, too clearly separate to be mistaken for anything else. "Nick," I rasped, and his head snapped up so fast I heard his neck crack. "You're awake." He was on his feet instantly, hovering, his hands hovering too, like he didn't know where they were allowed to land anymore. "Josh, you scared the hell out of me. You just dropped, right there on the sidewalk, and He stopped. His eyes went to the monitor again, then back to me, and something in his face was breaking open in real time, confusion and hurt, and dawning realization, all fighting for space. "The doctor came in while you were out. She asked me if I was the father." The words hung in the sterile air between us like something physical, something with weight and edges. "She asked because your chart says 14 weeks, he continued, voice low and unsteady in a way I'd never heard from him before, not even in our worst moments. 14 weeks, Josh. That's 4 months. He pressed the heel of his hand against his eyes, breath shaking. "That's from before you left." I couldn't speak. I lay there with tears sliding hot and silent down my temples into my hair, every rehearsed speech I'd practiced in the mirror evaporating uselessly, leaving nothing behind but the terrible, simple truth laid bare between us with no soft edges left to protect either of us from it. "Say something," Nick whispered. "Please, just tell me if it's true." "It's true," I finally managed, voice cracking on the words. "It's yours. It's always been yours. I found out 3 weeks after I left, and I was so scared, Nick. I was so scared of what you'd say, of what it would mean, that I ran further instead of running back. And then I couldn't stop running, and every day I told myself I'd tell you, and every day I found a reason not to, and I know that's not fair to you. I know I don't deserve." "Stop." His voice broke on the single word, and when I looked up, he was crying 2 silent tears. He made no move to wipe away his hand, finally landing gently, reverently on the blanket over my stomach, like he was afraid it might not be real. "You've been carrying my baby for 4 months. You've been bringing me lunch every single day with my baby right there under your jacket, and I never—" His voice cracked completely. "I never even noticed." God, Josh, what kind of alpha doesn't notice? "I hid it," I said, weeping openly now. "I hid it on purpose. This isn't your fault. None of this is your fault. It's mine. All of it is mine." "Why?" he said, and it wasn't angry, just broken, just desperately searching. "Why would you hide something like this from me? Did you think I wouldn't want it? Want you?" "You said you weren't the kind of alpha who settled down," I whispered, "the night before I left. You said it like it was a warning, like you were telling me not to hope for more than what we had, and I heard it and I thought if I told you about a baby you'd feel trapped, that you'd stay because you had to, not because you wanted to, and I couldn't survive that. Nick, I couldn't survive being someone's obligation instead of someone's choice." "That's not what I meant," he said, gripping my hand now, tight enough to hurt, tight enough to anchor. "That night, I wasn't warning you off. I was terrified. I'd never felt about anyone the way I felt about you, and it scared me so badly. I said the stupidest, most backwards thing I could have said, and then you were gone before I could take it back. Before I could tell you the truth, which is that I've spent every single day for 11 months trying to figure out how to get you to look at me again the way you used to. His thumb brushed over my knuckles, desperate and gentle at once. I didn't want you to leave. I have never once, not for a single second, wanted you gone from my life. Then why didn't you come after me? Because you left a note that said you needed space, and I thought if I loved you the way I said I did, I owed you that space, even if it was killing me. His forehead dropped to our joined hands, his shoulders shaking. I've regretted it every day since. I regretted it every time you showed up with lunch, and I told myself it didn't mean anything, because if it meant something and I was wrong about that too, I didn't think I'd survive losing you twice. The monitor kept its steady, secondary rhythm, small and fast and undeniably alive, filling the silence that fell between us as we both cried, hands locked together over the truth that had finally found its way into the open. I'm sorry, I whispered. I'm so sorry I didn't tell you sooner. You deserve to know from the very first day. I'm not going anywhere, Nick said, lifting his head, his eyes red but fierce, certain in a way I hadn't seen from him in almost a year. Not this time, not ever again. Whatever you need, however you need me, I'm here. For you, for the baby, for all of it. For the first time in 4 months, I let myself believe him completely. The doctor came back an hour later, a woman with kind eyes and an efficient manner who explained that I'd fainted from a combination of low blood pressure, dehydration, and exhaustion, all common enough in pregnancy, all easily managed with rest and better care. The baby, she assured us both, was perfectly fine, strong heartbeat, good size for 14 weeks, no cause for alarm. Nick held my hand through the entire explanation, and when the doctor asked if we wanted to hear the heartbeat again before she left, he answered yes before I even opened my mouth. His voice rough with something that sounded almost like awe. The sound filled the small room, fast and steady, whoosh, 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 whoosh. Undeniable proof of the life we'd made together in one desperate, tender night 11 months ago. I watched Nick's face as he listened, watched the way his jaw trembled, the way his eyes went glassy and distant like he was hearing something sacred. And something in my chest that had been clenched tight for 4 months finally began to loosen. That's incredible, he whispered, once the doctor had left us alone again. That's our kid. That's really our kid. 14 weeks and 3 days, I said, managing a watery smile. The doctor thinks it might be twins, actually. Wants to do another scan to confirm. Nick went a little pale, then a little green, then, unexpectedly, broke into the widest smile I'd seen on his face in almost a year. Twins, he repeated, like he was testing the word for weight and durability. Okay? Okay, we can do twins. I echoed softly, testing the word myself. We, he confirmed, bringing my hand up to press a kiss against my knuckles, warm and certain. There's no version of this where it's not we, Josh. Not anymore. I don't care how scared either of us has been. I'm done letting fear make decisions for us. They kept me overnight for observation, and Nick refused to leave, sleeping in the uncomfortable hospital chair, with his jacket draped over his shoulders and one hand resting on the edge of my bed, like even in sleep he needed to stay connected to me. I woke twice in the night, and both times found him watching, the eyes soft in the dim light, and both times he simply reached over and brushed my hair back from my face without a word. Like the gesture itself was a promise he intended to keep. In the morning, before they discharged me, he asked the question I'd been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. Move in with me, he said, sitting on the edge of my bed, both my hands wrapped in his. Not because you have to, not because of the babies, though God knows I want to be there for every single second of this now that I know. Because I love you, Josh. I've loved you since before you left, and I never stopped, not for one single day of the 11 months you were gone, Nick. I know it's fast, he continued, rushing now. Like if he stopped talking, the courage might leave him. I know we have a lot to figure out, a lot of trust to rebuild, and I'm not asking for everything all at once. I'm just asking for the chance to be there. To bring you lunch for once, instead of the other way around. To go to every doctor's appointment. To paint a nursery and argue with you about colors and be terrified together, instead of both of us being terrified alone. Tears slipped down my cheeks again, but they felt different this time. Lighter, less like grief and more like relief. Finally finding somewhere to land. Yes, I whispered. Yes, okay. Let's be terrified together. He kissed me then, soft and searching. 4 months of secrets and 11 months of separation dissolving into something new, being built in real time between us. And when we finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine. One hand splayed protectively over my stomach. I promise you, he murmured, I will never let either of you feel unwanted again, not for a single day. The weeks that followed felt like learning to breathe in a new kind of air. Nick took 2 days off work, unheard of during a renovation project, just to help me pack up my small apartment above the laundromat and move my things into his place. A modest house with good bones and too many empty rooms that suddenly didn't feel empty at all. Mrs. This's, Alvarez cried when I told her I wouldn't be delivering lunch anymore, then immediately started planning a baby shower with a ferocity that told me she'd probably known the whole story before either of us had said a word. Telling my own family was harder than telling Nick had somehow ended up being, because Nick's reaction once the shock passed had been nothing but love. But my parents had never fully understood why I'd left the way I did in the first place, and explaining that I'd been not just heartbroken, but pregnant and had hidden both facts for months. Required a phone call I put off for 2 full weeks before Nick finally sat beside me on the couch phone on speaker between us, his hand steady on my knee for courage. Mom, I said when she picked up, and my voice shook more than I wanted it to. I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me get through the whole thing before you say anything. She listened. She cried a little when I got to the part about fainting on the sidewalk, and cried harder when I explained that Nick had been there the whole time since. Steady and present, in a way that surprised even me some days. But by the end of the call, she was laughing through her tears, already asking about due dates and whether we knew the genders yet, and Nick squeezed my knee under the blanket, a silent, grateful acknowledgement that the hardest conversation was finally behind us. She likes you, I told him after I hung up, disbelieving, giddy with relief. She actually likes you. Everyone likes me eventually, he said, entirely too pleased with himself, and I swatted his arm, laughing for what felt like the first time in months without an undercurrent of fear beneath it. The baby shower, when Mrs. Hauer, Alvarez finally staged. It took over the entire diner on a slow Sunday afternoon, string lights and paper decorations strung between booths, half the construction crew showing up in their good shirts, looking wildly out of place among the balloons. Dana included, who hugged me with genuine warmth, and no trace of the rivalry I'd invented for her in my own anxious mind. I understood, watching her fuss over the tiny onesies laid out on the counter, that I had spent months fighting a battle that existed only in my own fear, and something in me softened permanently toward her that afternoon. An apology I never quite said out loud, but tried to show in every interaction after. Nick stood at the center of it all, looking faintly overwhelmed, accepting congratulations and backslaps from men twice his size, and every few minutes his eyes would find mine across the room. Some silent conversation passing between us that needed no words, just the steady reassurance of being seen, being chosen, being wanted exactly as we were. Best lunch delivery I ever got, he murmured later, arm around my shoulders as we walked home with our arms full of gifts, the whole city glowing gold in the last of the afternoon light. Worth every single peppers I complained about. You never actually minded the peppers, I said. No, he admitted, pressing a kiss to my temple. I never minded anything about you. I was just too scared to say it while there was still time. There's plenty of time now, I told him, and meant it with every part of myself that had once been too afraid to hope for exactly this. I told you, she said, hugging me fiercely at the diner counter for the last time. I told you that baby wasn't going to wait for you to be brave. Good thing your alpha's got enough bravery for the both of you now. Nick came to every appointment after that, sitting beside me in cramped exam rooms with his knee bouncing with nervous energy, asking the doctor 100 questions I hadn't even thought to ask myself. He learned the names of both babies' positions before I did, memorized due dates and growth percentiles like they were blueprints for a building he intended to construct with absolute precision. When the second ultrasound confirmed twins, he cried in the parking lot afterward, unashamed, laughing through the tears, already talking about bunk beds and matching cribs and whether we should find out the genders or wait for the surprise. "I want to know everything," he admitted one night, both of us tangled together on the couch, my back against his chest, his hands resting protectively over the curve of my belly that had grown undeniable now. No jacket in the world capable of hiding it anymore. "I missed 4 months. I don't want to miss anything else." "You're not going to," I promised, turning my head to press a kiss against his jaw. "I'm done hiding things from you. I learned my lesson the hard way." "We both did," he said softly. "I should have chased you down that first week. I let fear tell me to give you space when what you actually needed was to know you were chosen. I won't make that mistake again." The flutter came then, right under his palm, strong enough now that he felt it too, and his whole face lit up with a wonder that never seemed to fade no matter how many times it happened. "They know their dad's voice already," I told him, laughing at the look on his face. "The doctor said they can hear now." "Yeah?" Nick leaned down, speaking directly to my stomach with a tenderness that undid me every single time. "Hey, it's me. Sorry it took me so long to figure out you were in there. I'm not going anywhere now." "Not ever." The months moved faster after that, the way time tends to once fear stops slowing everything down. Nick painted the nursery himself over 3 weekends, a soft, warm yellow that worked for whatever the babies turned out to be, and I sat in the doorway most of those afternoons, too tired and too big to help much. Content just to watch him work, to watch the careful, focused way he did everything now that he'd let himself fully believe in this life we were building. "You missed a spot," I told him one Saturday, pointing lazily at a patch near the window trim. And he turned with a paintbrush in hand and an expression of mock betrayal that made me laugh so hard I had to press a hand to my ribs. "You could help, you know," he said, instead of critiquing from the doorway like some kind of foreman. "I am extremely pregnant," I reminded him, gesturing at the undeniable evidence of that fact. "My job is quality control and moral support. I take both very seriously." He crossed the room, knelt in front of my chair, despite the paint still drying on his hands, and pressed a kiss to my belly before resting his forehead there instead. Quiet for a long moment while I carted my fingers through his hair flecked now with pale yellow. "I keep thinking about all the Saturdays I spent alone in this house before you moved back in," he admitted quietly. "How quiet it was. I told myself I liked it that way. Told myself I'd built a life that worked fine on its own." He looked up at me, eyes soft, unguarded in a way that still occasionally caught me off guard, even now. I didn't know what I was missing until I got it back. "This. You, sitting there bossing me around about paint, I definitely didn't miss." "You definitely missed it," I said, laughing through the sudden thickness in my throat. "But I forgive you. This once." We furnished the room slowly, piece by piece, a second-hand rocking chair. Nick sanded and refinished himself over 2 evenings. 2 cribs he assembled with far more patience than I'd expected from a man who built entire buildings for a living, but apparently found flat-pack furniture instructions personally offensive. I hung soft cotton mobiles above each crib stars and moons that Nick's mother had sewn and shipped the moment she heard the news, and some evenings we simply sat together in the nearly finished room, saying nothing at all, letting the quiet do the work of healing whatever fear still lingered in the corners of us both. There were harder nights too, nights when the weight of everything we'd almost lost pressed down heavier than the babies themselves, when I woke from dreams where I'd never told him, where I'd raised our children alone in some other version of this life, and Nick would find me crying quietly in the dark and simply hold me until the fear passed, never once telling me to stop feeling it, only reminding me patiently every single time that this version, the one where I'd finally told the truth, was the only version that mattered now. You're allowed to be scared of what almost happened, he told me once, low and steady in the dark. I'm scared of it too, some nights. But we get to choose what we build from here. And I choose this. I choose you, every single version of this, every single day, for as long as you'll have me. We fought sometimes. Small fights born of exhaustion and hormones and the natural friction of two people learning to share a life after 11 months of silence between them. But they were different fights than the one that had driven me away in the first place. Fights that ended in conversation instead of running, in reassurance instead of doubt. Every single time, Nick made sure I knew, before either of us went to sleep, that nothing had changed in how he felt. That disagreement wasn't the same thing as danger. I used to think love that easy wasn't real, I told him one night, 7 months along now, unable to see my own feet, propped against a mountain of pillows while he rubbed slow circles into my aching lower back. I used to think if it didn't hurt, it wasn't serious enough to trust. And now? He asked, voice soft against the back of my neck. Now I think I spent a long time confusing pain for depth, I admitted. This doesn't hurt, this just feels like coming home every day. I didn't know that was allowed. It's allowed, he murmured, pressing a kiss below my ear. I'm going to make sure you know that every single day for the rest of our lives. Quote, they came 3 weeks early, on a night with thunder rolling low over the city, both of us laughing and terrified in equal measure as Nick drove faster than any speed limit technically allowed. One hand on the wheel and the other gripping mine so tightly I could feel his pulse hammering against my palm. Breathe, he kept saying, though I was fairly certain he needed the reminder more than I did, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, running a red light with a muttered apology to no one in particular. You're doing so good. We're almost there. Just breathe with me, okay? In through your nose. If you tell me to breathe one more time. I gritted out through a contraction that felt like the entire lower half of my body was being wrung out like a wet towel. I will show you exactly how hard I can breathe right into your... Noted, he said quickly, and I might have laughed if the pain hadn't chosen that exact moment to steal every ounce of air from my lungs. The hospital swallowed us into a flurry of fluorescent lights and hurried nurses, a wheelchair appearing from nowhere. Nick jogging alongside it with our overnight bag slung over one shoulder and a grip on my hand. He refused to relinquish even as they wheeled me into triage. Somewhere in the chaos, he found time to whisper against my hair that he loved me, that he was so proud of me, that whatever happened in the next several hours, I wasn't doing a single second of it alone. The labor was long, exhausting, more painful than anything I'd imagined even after months of preparation. But Nick never once let go of my hand, never once looked away, murmuring encouragement and love, and the occasional terrified curse whenever the machines beeped in ways that startled him. Somewhere around hour 11, sweat-soaked and shaking, I told him I couldn't do it anymore, that I was done, that he'd have to finish this part without me. And he just pressed his forehead to mine and told me I'd already done the impossible part months ago. The part where I chose to keep going even when I was terrified and alone, and this. This was just the last few feet of a road I'd already walked the hardest stretch of. It worked. Or maybe it was just time. Maybe the babies simply decided they were ready, regardless of what either of us said, but within the hour, the room filled with movement doctors and nurses speaking in the calm, urgent shorthand of people who did this every day, and Nick's hand never once loosened around mine, not even when I nearly crushed his fingers, not even when I sobbed his name into the crook of his neck, until finally, in the gray hush just before dawn, the room filled with the sound of two small, furious cries. A girl first, then a boy, born 4 minutes apart, both of them loud and pink and perfect. And when the nurse placed our daughter in my arms, I watched Nick's face crumble entirely, tears streaming freely as he held our son for the first time, rocking him with a gentleness that seemed impossible for hands that size, that strength. Look at them, he whispered, voice wrecked, awestruck, sitting on the edge of my hospital bed, so our children could be close to each other, close to us, this small, complete unit we built out of fear and courage, and finally, honesty. Look what we made, Josh. We made a family, I said, exhausted and overflowing with a joy too large for words. Even after everything, we still made it here. Shacked. Nick leaned over, carefully mindful of the baby in his arms, and kissed me slow and sweet, and certain, the way he'd been kissing me every day since that hospital room 8 months earlier. Like a promise renewed with each repetition. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making up for the 4 months I missed, he murmured against my lips. Every single day, I promise you that. You already have, I whispered back, looking down at our children, at the life we'd almost let fear steal from both of us. You already have. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, when both babies were finally miraculously asleep and the house held that particular stillness that only comes after chaos, I would find myself standing in the nursery doorway just watching them breathe. Watching the soft rise and fall of 2 small chests in matching cribs, and Nick would come find me there, wrapping his arms around me from behind, chin resting on my shoulder. Still can't believe it, he'd murmur into my hair. Any of it. You. Them. This whole life. I almost didn't tell you, I admitted once, months into parenthood, watching our daughter's fist curl and uncurl in her sleep. I almost let fear win. I think about that sometimes, how close I came to raising them without you, just because I was scared of what your face might do when I told you the truth. Nick turned me gently in his arms, tilting my chin up until I met his eyes, steady and warm and entirely certain in a way that had become as familiar to me now as my own heartbeat. But you did tell me, he said softly. Or the truth told itself, at least, when you needed it to. And I think that's the only part that matters now. Not how close we came to losing this, just that we didn't. I thought about all the lunches I'd carried across 2 city blocks, all the days I'd stood at the edge of that construction site with a secret pressed beneath my jacket, terrified and hopeful, and unable to stop myself from showing up anyway, some stubborn part of me refusing to fully let him go, even while I kept the biggest truth of my life hidden from him. I thought about the fear that had driven me, and the love that had driven me right back, every single day, until the truth simply couldn't be carried in silence any longer. I love you, I told him. The words as easy now as breathing, nothing left to hide behind them. I love you, and I love them, and I love this ridiculous, terrifying, wonderful life we almost didn't get to have. I love you too, Nick said, pressing his forehead to mine the way he always did, the gesture that had become our own private language of reassurance. Every version of you. The one who ran, the one who came back with lunch every day even when you were scared. And this one, right here, standing in our nursery at 2 in the morning, brave enough to say it all out loud. Outside, the city hummed on the way it always did, indifferent to the small miracle of 2 lives beginning inside these walls. Indifferent to the long road that had brought 2 frightened people back to each other despite every reason to stay apart. But inside, in the soft yellow glow of the nursery, none of that mattered. There was only this. Only us. Only the family we'd built out of a secret, finally spoken, and a love that had never actually left, no matter how far I'd once tried to run from it. And every single day since, without fail, Nick still brought me lunch. A small tradition reversed and renewed, a quiet reminder of how far we'd come from that construction site fence. From steam rising off a container held too close to my chest from a lie I told myself every single day that had turned out in the end to be the truest thing I never meant to say. This is just a job. This is just lunch. This means nothing. It had never meant nothing. It had always, from the very first day, meant everything. 3 years later, I stood at the same construction fence, though the site behind it belonged to an entirely different project now, and watched Nick crouch down at eye level with our daughter patiently explaining why she absolutely could not, under any circumstances, climb the scaffolding, no matter how much it resembled a jungle gym in her 3-year-old imagination. Our son sat on my hip, one fist knotted in my shirt, watching his sister's negotiation attempt with the solemn interest of a much older sibling supervising a much younger one. Despite the 4 minutes that technically separated them in age. Dada said no climbing, our daughter informed me later, indignant as we walked home with lunch containers empty and the late afternoon sun stretching our shadows long across the pavement. Dada is very strict. Dada is very sensible, I corrected laughing and caught Nick's eye over her head. The same warmth passing between us that had never once dimmed in 3 years of diapers and sleepless nights, and the particular chaos of raising twins who seemed determined to test every boundary in tandem. We still had our rituals. I still brought him lunch most days, though. Now it usually came with 2 small chaperones who insisted on carrying at least one item themselves, however precariously. And Nick still complained about the peppers with exactly the same mock outrage he'd used the very first week I'd started bringing him meals, back when neither of us had said the things that mattered most. Back when I'd been so certain that silence was safer than truth. I knew better now. Some nights after the twins were finally asleep and the house settled into its familiar quiet, Nick and I would sit together on the back porch, his arm around my shoulders, and talk about that year. The hardest and strangest year of both our lives, not with regret anymore, but with the kind of tenderness reserved for stories that end well despite every reason they shouldn't have. "Do you ever think about what would have happened," he asked once quietly, "if you hadn't fainted that day, if the truth had just kept waiting?" "I think about it," I admitted. "I think I would have told you eventually. I hope I would have anyway, but I'm glad I didn't have to find out how long eventually might have taken." "Me too," he said, pressing a kiss to my hair. "Every single day, I'm grateful the truth found a way out, even if it took a hospital bed to do it." "You forgave me so fast," I said, something I still marveled at sometimes, still turned over in my mind on quiet nights like this one. "I lied to you for months, hid an entire pregnancy, and you just forgave me. Like it was easy." "It wasn't easy," Nick said, honest as always. "It hurt, finding out that way. But I understood why you did it, once I really thought about it. I understood what I'd said that night, how it must have sounded to someone already scared of losing everything. I couldn't stay angry at you for being afraid of something I'd handed you myself." He turned, cupping my face in one broad, careful hand. The same hands that had once shaped steel beams and now more often shaped blanket forts and paper airplanes. "Forgiveness wasn't the hard part, Josh. The hard part would have been losing you and never getting the chance to try again." I leaned into his palm, closing my eyes, listening to the distant sound of our children's monitor crackling faintly from the open window above us. 2 small heartbeats we could still even now remember hearing for the very first time in a sterile hospital room that had changed everything. "I love you," I told him, the words worn smooth now from years of saying them, never once losing their weight. "I love this life. I love that we got here, even though the road was so much harder than it needed to be." "I love you too," Nick said, drawing me in against his chest, steady as the first day I'd ever leaned on him, steadier now for everything we'd survived together. And for what it's worth, I'd choose every single hard mile of that road again, every time, if it still ended here, with you, with them, with all of this. The porch light flickered on automatically as the evening deepened around us, and somewhere above our children slept soundly unaware of how close they'd once come to a story that might have unfolded so differently. Unaware of the courage it had taken their father to finally tell the truth, and the courage it had taken their other father to hear it and stay anyway. But I knew. I would always know. And every single day, in 10,000 small ways, I made sure Nick knew it too. This is not just a job. This is not just lunch. This has never, not for one single day since, meant nothing at all. If you made it to the end, you're my kind of person. Leave a subscribe, comment down your favorite part of the story, and if you want early access to videos, exclusive content, or just want to support the channel, hit that join button right below the video. Even one member genuinely means the world to me. See you in the next one.